Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Doctor Who Classic Series review. Today we are tackling the very beginning of Season 26. Last time we looked at the Macra Terror, and just before that we talked about Season 12. So if you want to catch up on those reviews, as well as other ones that I've done in the past, check out the playlist, hopefully linked in the description or at the end of this video, or just on the channel in general. We're going to be starting Season 26, and every week we're going to be reviewing a new story. Today is Battlefield, next week is Ghostlight, followed by Curse of Fenric and Survival. As per usual, we're going to talk about the story, then the first half, the last half, characters, best bits, and then the overall sort of score out of 10 and my general sort of thoughts. It's going to be an interesting one because obviously Season 26 is very different to Season 12, especially in terms of comparison of the last one. Very different feel, very different style, very different standards in terms of quality for Doctor Who as well. So yes, let's talk about it. Starting off with the story. The Doctor and Ace land in the English countryside amidst UNIT, who are busy doing something with a missile convoy. It's not going very well, but they're trying their best, bless them. Meanwhile, we have knights from a different dimension arriving on Earth, fighting each other and eventually UNIT, and then eventually trying to destroy the planet. So standard Doctor Who stuff, really. They all recognise the Doctor as Merlin, one of their own, and then sort of involve him in the battle. So that's how the Doctor gets dragged into stuff. So yeah, very basic stuff, very surface level stuff, nothing too out of the ordinary, really. Talking about the first half, episodes 1 and 2, interesting. Genuinely quite interesting. I didn't love the first half of the story. It's back to the sort of standard classic formula for me for Doctor Who. It's a nice change of pace when the first half of the story is also quite enjoyable. And it's just my approach to Classic Who. It's nothing too insulting. It's not me poking holes for the sake of it. It's just that standard, and you know, for most of the classic episodes or stories that I've watched, it's always the first half of the story that drags for me. And then when it gets into the last half, it sort of speeds up and feels more enjoyable and more on the edge of my seat. And that seems to be the modern sort of case. And there's certain examples where that hasn't happened. I think the Macra Terror was an example of that, where the first half was actually a lot more entertaining. But today, yeah, it's back to classic form, where the first half isn't too great. It's quite dull, but still somewhat interesting. It's great to see UNIT back again, and obviously it's absolutely phenomenal to see the Brigadier, Alistair Gordon Lethbridge-Stewart, back in the role for the very last time for a big Doctor Who role other than Dimensions in Time, obviously Sarah Jane Adventures. The whole thing about the Knights we'll definitely get into. I don't really enjoy that aspect too much, but it doesn't really feel out of place stylistically with the rest of McCoy's era. In terms of wackiness and the general sort of vibe of it, it doesn't feel unnatural. It was just very sort of daunting coming right out of Season 12 and then jumping right into this. The last half of the story, definite improvement. It really picks up, especially in episode 4. Having episode 3, the Brigadier meeting the Doctor again. We'll talk again a little bit more about that in just a bit, but generally the story does pick itself up. The pace picks itself up, the story drives itself forward, it becomes a little bit more entertaining. I'd sort of given up almost in the first half, thinking that maybe I'm just not going to enjoy this story at all. And then the second half was like, no, okay, maybe there's something here. Certainly not the worst thing I've ever seen, but it was still enjoyable, and it still grabbed me. But there's a few aspects that don't personally interest me. But we'll get onto that in just a bit. But yeah, the second half, much better, much more of an improvement. The conclusion doesn't feel rushed. A big criticism I had of the Macra Terror last week, check out that review by the way, is that I think the ending was just way too quick after such a long story, and with this being the same length in terms of story, I felt like the conclusion came to a nice fitting end, slowly but surely, but right. It didn't feel rushed or too slow or anything like that. Talking about characters specifically, we'll start with the Doctor as per usual. This time it's the 7th Doctor. The 7th Doctor's brilliant, isn't he? Sylvester McCoy is great. He's not at his best in this episode, I'll be honest. At the point of watching this story, it was my second McCoy story. Now I've watched obviously the rest of the season, so I can kind of compare, and I have to say this is probably, I feel like it's sort of, as the season goes on, development, you sort of attach more to the Doctor and Ace. So yeah, I think, again, bringing in Ace in just a minute, but in terms of the Doctor, again, I feel like not his best performance, not his best, you know, he's great, but like you don't see enough of him to really, you know, I don't really feel like I've got enough out of McCoy this story. It's not a negative thing. I really enjoyed his performance when he was there, but I just want him to be there more, you know what I mean? Ace is great fun. Ace has always been hit or miss for me. Sometimes I love her, sometimes I really don't. She's great in the story though. I think she does a decent job. Again, bits and bats, not as good as she has been in the rest of the season, but still perfectly fine. Basically on the same level as McCoy. Every story we go through this season, they get better and better and better, which is definitely a good thing. I would hate for it to go the other way. The Brigadier, Alistair Gordon Lethbridge-Stewart, he's back. The Brigadier. Absolutely brilliant as per usual. Every story we talk about him that he's in, he's brilliant, and that's no surprise, that's no shocker. You know, Nicholas Courtney brings his A game every single time, and he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. He brings the story up. He definitely lifts it from being a sort of lackluster story to an average or even actually good story. If he wasn't here, the story would have been a hell of a lot worse. As for the new Brigadier, also very enjoyable, but just not enough screen time. It's clear that they were trying to make this new Brigadier the Brigadier for the sort of next era of the show, but obviously that never happened because this was the final classic season, which is a bit of a shame. It'd be great to see her back, but you know, that never happened, and it's a bit depressing really, but you know, it happens, it happens. Now let's talk about Morgaine's army and the Destroyer. You know, and here's a bit of an explanation as to why I don't really like this story. It's not bad. In terms of quality, it's still pretty good, and what they've actually put forward and what they do with it is interesting and enjoyable. My problem comes with the general specifics of whatever your cup of tea is for Doctor Who and sort of media in general. I'm not a massive medieval fan. I'm far from it. I don't really like the whole knights in shining armor thing, you know, the whole dragon. I've never got into Game of Thrones. I know that's not medieval, but like, it's just sort of that side of the fantasy-esque stuff and that side of history. It's not really my cup of tea. So this story was a bit more difficult, with most of it being based around knights in shining armor from a different dimension. I just tuned out because I was like, this is not my cup of tea at all. I prefer big sci-fi stuff. I prefer robots and stupid wacky stuff. This was a bit, yeah, it's just not my genre, which is perfectly fine. I totally understand why lots of other people would enjoy this, but I wanted to sort of explain that this is probably part of the reason why I'm not going to give this episode a very high rating. It's because it just didn't connect with me, because I don't really like that genre. So yes, it does a brilliant job of what it's given, but the whole Morgaine's army thing and Merlin and all this sort of stuff, it basically did nothing for me that it maybe would with a medieval kind of genre fan. And as for the Destroyer, the makeup looked brilliant, the effects were really good, genuine presence on screen, but did absolutely bog all. That's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, he did absolutely nothing. So maybe if he actually did something, I would feel a little bit more passion towards it. That being said, the Brigadier killing him was great. Just shooting him with silver bullets. I mean, that was a great, you know, last part for the Brigadier in the show. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed that. Talking about best bits, I've only got a couple for this, but yeah. The third Doctor era kind of feel of this story is probably a best bit in general. Bessie shows up for the first time since, I don't know, maybe the 5 Doctors, which is really cool and exciting, and obviously with it being driven by the Brigadier and the 7th Doctor, that was really enjoyable. The Brigadier's inclusion in general and Unit's inclusion made it feel like a Pertwee era story. It felt like a homage to the past, you know? It felt like what Twice Upon a Time tried to do with the Hartnell era, try to give it like a nice sort of, oh, remember this? And I feel like it did a really good job with that in terms of breathing the same style as the Pertwee era of the show. Something that modern Who unit has never really been able to do too much. I think Battlefield does a really good job with the inclusion of the Brigadier, the inclusion of Bessie, the inclusion of a few other little winks and nudges here and there as well, and the general sort of Earth feeling. People are attacking a unit operation and the unit soldiers are fighting back. It's bog standard Doctor Who stuff, but it works because it's a nice homage to the past of the show, because at this point they could start homaging past stuff opposed to just continuing. And the ending was another best bit, I would say. I really genuinely thoroughly enjoyed the sort of last act of this story. The whole thing about, you know, with the nuclear missile and all that sort of thing, and the Doctor having that one-on-one confrontation with Morgaine. I thought that was very interesting, very well performed. Brigadier killing the Destroyer was incredible, probably one of the better scenes of this season, never mind the story. Really enjoyed that. But yeah, no, there's the ending, the final sort of climax and the final confrontation was all very well handled, in my opinion. Yeah, so overall, I think I've given a very wide sort of perspective on my thoughts. Some bits I really like. The stuff about knights I'm not too big of a fan on, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. But yeah, that's just that. Overall, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I'd probably give it higher if I was more of a fan of the whole Knights in Shining Armour stuff, medieval stuff, but unfortunately I'm not, so I have to sort of drop it down a little bit. It's good stuff, but it's just not for me personally. Anyway, that's basically it for this review. Catch us next week for Ghostlight, and if you haven't already, check out some previous reviews on this channel. We've just done Season 12, Robot, Ark in Space, Centauran Experiment, Genesis of the Daleks, and Revenge of the Cybermen, as well as the Macra Terror last week, and we're going to just keep going. As long as you guys seem to be enjoying these classic reviews, we're going to keep going through them. It's also a great excuse for me to watch more of Classic Who that I haven't already seen, you know, that's another thing as well. Anyway, yes, I'll see you all next week for Ghostlight, and yeah, that's that. Leave a like if you enjoyed, comment below for any more Classic Who suggestions in the future, subscribe with notifications on if you haven't already. We've got a Patreon page for early access, exclusive content, name in the description, Discord server, all that sort of stuff. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram for all the latest updates, news, reviews, all that sort of stuff. That's all linked in there as well. That's that. Thanks for watching, and see you all next time. Bye bye.